Hi there, it's Simon Hurley and I'm a 15-year-old card maker here at Scrapbook.com, and in this lesson I'm going to be sharing how to use watercolor pencils on your cards to create backgrounds, detailed images, and to even color in the tiniest image. So let's turn down to the work surface and get started. I'm starting out by using this teacher stamp set from Avery Elle, and we're going to use this apple image right here. So I'm going to pull it out of the packaging. And then I can add this right onto an acrylic black. Then we're going to take our stamp and bring in our piece of cardstock. This is going to be our card layer that goes on top, and this is where our design will be. So I'm going to take some Versamark ink. We're going to do some embossing later, and this is a clear sticky ink that goes on your ink pad so that it can hold the embossing powder when you heat it. So I'm going to start off by inking the stamp up with this. So you get a nice thin layer of that. And then I'm going to go in with the black ink right over top of it. So it'll just be a black image, but it'll have that clear sticky ink underneath, so the embossing powder will still stick to it. And that won't ruin your ink pad or anything either. So then you can stamp your image down, kind of right in the center, and give it some great pressure. And then you have a nice solid stamped image there. And then I'm going to grab a larger sheet of cardstock with a fold down the center, and this will just be easier so that our embossing powder can go back into the jar. We're going to use some clear embossing powder today, and that'll make this surface nice and shiny, and it'll protect it from any watercolor pencil from getting on top of it and kind of clouding that black image. So just sprinkle that right over top, and any of the excess will fall right into the sheet of cardstock, and you can put it back in the jar after you're done. So now the image is covered in that embossing powder, and to clean this up, you can just fold it up and dump it back into the jar. To set this embossing powder, we're just going to grab our heat tool and heat this up, and it's really awesome when it changes and heats all up. You don't want to burn the embossing powder, and you'll notice that it's kind of heating up once you get to see your black image again, and that's when the embossing powder is good. You just want to make sure you can see your black image all over. And there we go. Once the image is heated up, we're going to set this off to the side. This is going to be the base of the card. Then I'm going to grab another piece of Bristol cardstock. This is great for the watercolor pencils to go on, and it'll kind of smooth out on there better than regular cardstock. And we're going to do the same steps with the Versamark. And then we're going to stamp with black ink right over top of it. And this is the image we'll be coloring throughout the video. And we'll be cutting this out later on. So I'm going to stamp that down, bring in the cardstock, and then we're going to re-emboss this one as well. So then you can dump the powder back into the jar and use that again later. And then we can heat this image up as well. So then once that's all heated up, we can start coloring in this image with our watercolor pencils. I'm going to be using the Prima watercolor pencils today for all my coloring, and I'm using Bristol cardstock, and that'll help the watercolor pencils kind of smooth out and work just a little bit better. So I'm just going to start shading right at the top, right where the core of the apple is, and just add some dark red up there. Pushing pretty hard, you want lots of pigment, and then I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom of the image. And you don't need to add a ton of color, and just add it kind of all around the apple image. I'm also going to throw in some orange in there. And we can add more color as we continue to go on. I'm going to grab a paper towel. This will help with cleanup and with our water brush. And we're going to be using the water brush to watercolor our image in today. So all you need to do is just kind of move it right over top of that pencil you just colored, and it will bring some of that color out and into the image, and it'll spread it out really nicely. Once I have some of the pigment moved out a little bit, I'm going to wipe off my water brush and kind of pick up some more of that color, and that'll just make sure it's nice and light in the center to kind of fade it out. I'm going to wipe off my brush again, and then move on to the top area of the apple. So I'm going to bring down some of that color like I did earlier. And then I'm going to wipe off my brush and bring in some of that color in the center. So that just gives it some shading. Then the top and the bottom are darker, and the middle of the apple is nice and light. So it kind of makes it look like a round image. If you want to, you can even go back and add some more color. So I'm going to throw in some green on this side, and then you can just water it back out. You don't want to work the cardstock too much though, so that's all the color I'm going to add here. Then for the leaves, I'm just going to do some quick and simple shading. I'm going to add some light color to the inside. And then for the outside of the leaf, I'm going to do some darker green color. And you can press down pretty hard when you're adding the color here, because you'll be watering it out. So I'm just going to take my water brush, water out those light green areas, and then wipe my brush off. And then I can continue with that darker color on the outside and watering that out. So if you want to, you can heat set this image again. You don't want to heat it too much though to mess with the embossing. Just heat it enough so that it's dry. Then I'm going to take these little scissors, the mini snips, and just quickly cut out around this image. I'm not going to leave any border on this just because I want it to sit with that black line against the other apple that we stamped on the card. So I'm going to cut right along that embossing powder. So once all your image is cut out, I'm going to start on the background of our card to ground that image. So I'm going to pull in this other apple that we embossed, and we're going to grab a light blue colored pencil and just color kind of a border right around the apple. And this is pretty simple. You don't need to be perfect with this since it'll all be watered out in the end. And then after that's finished, I'm going to get my water flowing in the brush by squeezing it, and then just kind of water out that border a little bit. And you get this fun blue shadow on the outside of your image. So this just creates a nice background for your colored apple to sit on. So then you can heat set this as well so that it's nice and dry, but don't heat set it too long because it'll mess with your embossing powder. If you want, you can go back and make the background just a little bit darker, but I kind of like how it looks nice and light. So then we're going to start adding our colored image that we cut out earlier. So I'm going to grab some pieces of foam tape and add it right to the image. And this will just add some dimension. So then I'm going to take the colored apple, and I'm going to align it right with our embossed lines there. And then you can press it down. And you got that nice raised image then, and you can still see some of that stamped apple underneath. I'm going to do the same thing with the leaves as well. I'm just going to add some little pieces of foam tape onto there, and then add the leaves down. And then to finish this card off, I'm going to grab a top folding card base, and you can see how to cut these in lesson 1. And I'm going to grab my tape runner adhesive, line the back with a little bit, and then you can align it with your card. I find that starting at the fold of the card is always best, and then you can adhere it up there, and then move it down. And that way, if there's any excess cardstock there, you can always cut it off. So there's that finished card. This is a great card if you want to thank your teachers for all the bad things your kids do. It's a great card for just giving to teachers at the end of the year. Moving on to the next card, I'm going to share with you guys how to color in some more detailed images using these watercolor pencils. So we're going to start off using this stamping platform, and you'll notice that it says rubber in the left-hand corner here. All you have to do to change this if you're using clear stamps is pull it up like this. You can pull it out of those hinges, and then turn it to the side that reads clear, and then you can shove it back in. And if you can read the word up there, that's how you know that that's the stamp you're going to be using. So I'm going to open this up and put my little piece of Bristol cardstock in here. This is nice for the colored pencils to blend on rather than cardstock. And then I'm going to grab a stamp from the Avery L. Woodland Wonder stamp set, this little branch here. And we're going to line it up kind of at the bottom so we can have some fun little critters sit up there. So I'm going to pick this up with the acrylic piece, and then we can ink it up with our waterproof dye ink. So ink it up nicely, and then I'm going to flip this over and stamp it down onto our piece. Give it nice pressure so that it stamps well. And there you have your little trees for the woodland creatures to sit on. So I'm going to move this stamping tool out of the way, and then we can start on our little critters we're going to be coloring in. I'm going to also use another piece of Bristol cardstock for this, and I'm going to pull out one of the little animals we're going to be using today. I'm just going to use this little owl so it can sit on the branch, but you can use any one or multiples of these little critters. So I'm going to take this little owl and put it on an acrylic block, and I can stamp down using that same waterproof black ink. That way it won't smear when we're watercoloring with our pencils. So now that we have two pieces, we can start our coloring. I'm going to start off coloring this little owl in, and I'm going to use different shades of brown to shade it in. So wherever there's a line, like his wing meets his body, you can add some little shading there. And his feet, I kind of just do it all around the owl, and this will be blended out in just a little bit. And you don't need to make it perfect either. I tend to just scribble in the lines, and then I can blend that out afterward. So after you're done with that, I'm going to just take my water brush here and start blending that color out. And right when you touch it with water, it reacts with it, and it'll just blend out really nicely on your card. So I'm just going to keep pulling that color in. And if you want lighter spots, you can just wipe off your brush to the side to get that color clean, or off onto a paper towel, and you'll get that nice clean color so you can have some lighter spots in the center. Then to color in his beak, I'm just going to come in with a black colored pencil. And I'm not even going to blend that out. You don't need to blend it out with these colored pencils. You can still just use them like regular, and if you want to, you can watercolor them. They work both ways. And then for these trees, I'm going to come in with that same black color. I'm just going to really quickly run the colored pencil right over top of that tree. Really super simple. And then you can blend this out as well. And that'll blend that tree pretty nicely, and it's super quick and easy to do. But you still get that really awesome shading with these watercolor pencils in the tree. Then for the leaves, I'm just going to color it in with some simple green colors. Just little scribbles of colors. And I'm going to do two different shades. After that's all done, I can just blend those little colors out, and there you have your leaves nice and colored in, and it gives a pretty smooth effect when you're watercoloring with these. So after that, I'm going to set this little tree scene aside, and we're going to add our little owl onto it. And I'm going to be cutting these out using the little tonic snips just to cut right around the edge, and I'm going to leave a little white border around it so it pops off of our background. So I'm just cutting right around this. You could always do this if the set has coordinating dies. You can run it through the die cutting machine. But I like to just cut a little tiny white border around it. And if you move your paper rather than moving your scissors, you get a nice smooth line for your cutting. So once that's all cut out with that little border around it, I'm just going to grab a little bit of foam tape. And then you could just sit your little owl right onto that background. If you want to, you can even add a little sentiment on the card. So I'm just pulling out the sending hugs sentiment, and I'm just going to pick this up with an acrylic block. Sometimes these have lines on them etched into it, and it helps to line up the sentiment like that. That's how you know you can get it straight on your card. And then I'm going to ink that up. And I'm going to stamp it down right above those trees. Give it some nice pressure. And there you have a fun little sentiment on there. Now to finish off this card, I'm just going to take some tape runner adhesive and add it to the back. Then I'm going to grab a top folding note card that I turned on its side. So this will be a side folding card. I'm going to add that right on top there. And you could have fun with some glossy accents on that little owl's eyes or beak and have fun with lots of critters on here. But for this card, I just wanted to keep it nice and simple. So here's the finished card, but if you want to go a little bit more crazy with it, I also created this fun one with all the different critters and a banner that comes in the stamp set as well. So you can really go crazy and have fun with coloring all these critters. And I just used the regular colored pencil on some of these animals as well, rather than just watering it out, and it works perfectly like that as well. Thanks so much for joining me for this watercolor pencil lesson. I can't wait to see all of your pictures in the class gallery, and I hope you learned a lot. I'll see you soon.